This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the Inland Northwest. I'm your host, E.J. Iannelli. Joining me today in the Rogue Heart Media studio is Rachel Bade-McMurphy, a jazz musician as well as the founder and the artistic director of Imagine Jazz. So welcome, Rachel.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about all that we have to talk about today, because Imagine Jazz and you have been very, very busy. And I think the key event that I want to discuss today is the Glass Bead Orchestra and the recording. It's actually a sort of a live performance that's also recorded at the listening room or the Hamilton listening room. And then you're going to go in and record an album.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm very, very keen to hear about all of that. So first, let's dive into Glass Bead Orchestra and how this initiative came about out of your other work, because you're heavily involved in the local jazz scene in many capacities.
For sure. So the Glass Bead Orchestra is a 10-piece ensemble, and I've always wanted to do some orchestration with larger ensembles. That's something that, throughout my musicianship and composition, most of what I do is quartet, quintet setting, and I've always wanted to write with more colors. And so when the opportunity to write a grant through Chamber Music America came up, they allow for ensembles up to 10. And so I thought, well, if 10 is how many I can have, I will write it for 10 and see if I get it. And then the other piece of that is, and the reason we call it an orchestra is because we do have strings involved. And basically, in order to have the full ensemble that I wanted, because I wanted a full rhythm section with both guitar and piano, and then a few of my friends on horns. So we've got trombone, 2 saxophones, and trumpet. And then that left 2 available strings. So we could have violin and and cello. And so that's basically the idea. And then within that, I sort of thought, well, we basically have a quartet as part of it, because if you consider the upright bass as part of the string quartet, and the guitar could be part of the string ensemble as well. So there's a lot of available colors and things that we can do to utilize that. I feel like the more, we have to get through this first round of presentation of the music that's written so far. But I feel like as I learn to write with those colors more, though, there will be a lot more opportunities of beautiful, lush colors to be made and nuances. So I hope to really be able to develop that farther.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you keep using the word colors to describe music. It seems very synesthetic. And what are the colors that come to your mind with this particular instrumentation? Because when you have 10 instruments at your disposal, you can populate those with any number of instruments. I mean, you could have a massive saxophone group if you wanted.
For sure.
So why did you choose this particular orchestration or instrumentation?
Yeah, and it's interesting because some artists really do, even though we're making music, my particular version of art is music, but I do feel like I'm a very visual person. And so when you say, what colors do you see? Well, all of a sudden I'm seeing a white background with beautiful rainbow colors that are used sparsely throughout it. And I do really think visually with the music that I make and write. And so a lot of times I'm thinking programmatically about a scene or a visual or a story, something like that. But what's really wonderful about jazz is that we get to tell a story through improvisation. And so those colors and moods are constantly changing, and we can use a lot of different sounds to emote that type of music. And so with the addition of the strings, I feel like it makes possible a lot more of my roots, which is classical training. So I started out my life as a classical clarinetist.
I didn't know that. No, yeah. I just assumed you had been born with a saxophone in your hand.
Well, it feels like that at this point. It really does. But I started, my first instrument was clarinet. And so I did all the band training. And when I went to college at WSU, I was intending to be a clarinet major. And I went all the way through my requirements there on clarinet, all the while still loving saxophone, all the way still loving singing. But some of those things were things that I did kind of in the background. And so yeah, at this point, it's been so many years, all of that stuff kind of goes in phases of things that I get really into and come back to. But I really love the depth of implication in a lot of orchestral music. And so when I think about the articulation and the weight of tone that can be used, that's something that I really bring to mind through my training at WSU, like when I got to work with the orchestra and some of the conductors that I worked with in my training there. And there's a feeling and a feel, I guess, about the way the movement is when the sound is deep.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're getting at. So there's moments with the Glass Bead Orchestra that we're getting into really dense, murky, deep, dark colors that are dissonant and purposefully dissonant. And then there's moments in the jazz where the trumpet solo or the saxophone solo takes us into kind of a freedom of something that feels like maybe victory or something like that.
Yeah.
But because of the name, we're drawing on the spiritual aspect with the Glass Bead Orchestra. So it's like if I put together all of the musics that I'm influenced from the spiritual jazz side of things, John Coltrane and Alice Coltrane and things like that, the Strata East stuff of the 70s.
And Archie Shepp as well is in there as well. Okay.
Yes. And it's interesting with Archie because you think of, or at least I think of his music as being kind of abstract a little bit. Whereas if you think of it as a painter, it's not the clear picture of the flower or the landscape. It's like little pencil drawings of what the idea is. And that to me, I think is a big part of that visual element that I always think about is whether you're being very factual with the scene or whether you're implying. And that's just what I love about music, is that you can imply so many different things and at so many different levels. And it's all at things that I can deeply understand and feel, but it can't always be put into words, and it can't always be clearly articulated from one person to the other without the art.
And the folks that you mentioned, and Coltrane, and obviously Coltrane he contains multitudes. So we have ballads Coltrane, which is very trad. My grandmother could listen to that and enjoy it. And then we have a Love Supreme Coltrane, which is getting into the more spiritual side, and the freer side. We talk about Archie Shepp as well. And I have to say, when I read the press release and some of the promotional materials, you talked about channeling kind of the free spirit of jazz and the art spirit of jazz. And I became a little trepidatious because free is kind of where I draw my boundary.
Sure.
Like I can only go so far with free. And that's just my personal listening habits. But when I listened to the two tracks that you've got out, then I realized it was very much in this post-bop vernacular, which I think you're comfortable in. And then I think you also acknowledge that, like, you're still very much within a post-bop and hard bop vein. No?
For sure. And then there's moments of the music that we have yet to record that people will be able to see at the listening room and when we record it in the studio, where we are doing what we call conduction. And that comes out of Butch Morris, who was a wonderful free jazz musician. And I don't think he would classify himself as a jazz musician, actually.
Oh.
I think he would just call himself an artist and a musician because he worked with all forms of music. But what's interesting about Butch's work is he codified an entire list of hand signals that he would use, because what he found is that as a conductor, he found that the music that was written on the page he wanted to be able to do more than just what was solidly written on the page. And so he wanted to be able to use aspects of improvisation within the written score. And so he made all these hand signals so that he could basically at will call upon the orchestra to follow his signal into wherever he wished to go. And what's really cool about that is it's live improvisation, but you, as the conductor, you don't get to control fully what happens.
Yeah.
So you are responding in real time to what you're hearing, and then the musicians are responding to you, and as the conductor, you're trying to pull apart these different things. And so I love the idea of conduction because of the fact that it makes it an action, right? And so it's not just the little, like, yes, it is conducting, but conduction is its own thing. And so we're going to use that as well. And I've also always wanted to write something in a 12-tone row. And so that the piece that I wrote that is using a 12-tone row, which can get very, for some people, that can start to feel non-melodic. And in fact, it's the point is that you are using a series or a row so that you're not calling upon your regular gravitational components of rhyme and repetition, right? So you're going through all 12 notes. And so I utilized a row for the piece that we're going to use with the conduction. So it'll actually really be, that's one of those moments of really murky dissonance. But I used it as the quote that I utilized from the Glass Bead game book is talking about basically an argument between the two main characters. And so it brings it all back together because you have dissonance and friction and disagreement, basically. And then you are trying to find resolution. And so when we're listening to this kind of thing, and it's only a few minutes long, so people will get a little bit uncomfortable, and then there will be some kind of a repetition at the end that will resolve. But yeah, it's just bringing together all of the different aspects of my training and things that I've always wanted to try, wanted to do, and gives us a reason to do it. You know, some of the stuff that I learned in 2017, I went back to New York to the School for Improvised Music. And that's where I got introduced to conduction and some of these different things. So, you know, there's a whole world out there of ways of free music and creative music, even outside of the jazz world.
Yeah, and since you brought it up, it's very easy for me to get ahead of myself and start diving into the music and encouraging you to dive into the music because that's kind of exciting. But the Glass Bead Orchestra has its origins, I think in last year, was it September of 2024, you came together at SFCC and kind of premiered this ensemble in its original form. And I kind of want to talk about the physical makeup of the group and how you put it together, but also both the literary and the musical inspiration, because it was the Hermann Hesse Glass Bead Game novel from the 1940s that then inspired Clifford Jordan. And he had Glass Bead Games, which is, I mean, heralded as you know, just a quintessential album, that manages to achieve a lot. And it is both the novel and Clifford Jordan's album were very holistic and meant to pull from all these different artistic influences and channel them into music. So again, there's so many paths to go down. But as far as putting the group together, you may not have even decided on a name at this point, but September of last year is when you first put this group together and said, okay, this is what we're going to do.
And so we debuted that. You know, we'll talk about the grant, but basically when I put together the grant for the ensemble, you pick a coach, and it's an artist educator. And so I chose Ryan Keberly for a variety of reasons. Not only is he an incredible musician, but he's from Spokane, and he also has dabbled in, more than dabbled. He has a whole career.
And he's played on the Tonight Show band.
He's done so many things. And the Maria Schneider Orchestra, which is like kind of the highest of the high. I mean, a lot of times we think the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, which is the other one, but it's that one and the Maria Schneider Orchestra. For her, for innovation, composition, that's kind of like the it, and for improvisation. So Ryan Keberly wanted to come through, which on the Imagine Jazz side, we host guest artists. And so he brought Catharsis through in the fall. And so that was the first, it was the perfect time to bring all that together because he would be here to do our first coaching session. And then he was going to perform. So it made sense that we opened. So that's basically how the order of operations gets a little crazy because it's like there's 20 things up in the air at a time and you're like, what do? But yeah, that's basically how that came to be. And we premiered 3 compositions at that time.
And which one? So there was Lonely Muse?
Mm-hmm, Lonely Muse. And then The Dim Reminder.
The Dim Reminder, okay.
Yeah, and then we did the first part of the suite, which is to come. And so that part, which is the Glass Bead game suite, and the first movement was called Responsibility.
Oh, wow. Okay. And at what point did you decide on Glass Bead Orchestra and that entire legacy, both literary and musical?
Yeah, I think it was last spring. We were driving around, and we're always talking about branding and rebranding and all of these things.
And who's
we is basically myself and my husband, Brendan McMurphy, who
plays drums.
Yeah, he plays drums and trumpet.
As well as trumpet. Yeah, I didn't want to neglect that.
So he's always around in the development of the various ideas. And so, I don't know, we were talking about it, and I'm always coming up with these ideas. Well, what about this? What about that? And somehow, we were talking about the Glass Bead, and I said the Glass Bead Orchestra, and the minute I said it out loud, it was like, that's it. That's the one I want to do. Because actually, when I went to write the grant for Chamber Music America, I had to decide what project I was going to use because I could have done anything. I could have just done a quartet if I wanted. And so it's like, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to work on some original music? Do I want to go back and work on some of the Wayne Shorter material that we always want to get back to? And that was kind of the it moment where as soon as I said Glass Bead Orchestra out loud, I said, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
That's the it. So, and because it takes you back to such a particular part within the art and within the music, because any jazz musician knows exactly, oh yeah, the Glass Bead game. And what's funny about that Clifford Jordan album is that it's so inside. It's very original, but everything is so rooted. And when I think about what I want to take all these adventures, but I also want to be very steeped and rooted in the music that I love so much.
I feel like inside is such a jazz term, but you know it when you hear it, right?
It's true.
Yeah. And so you assembled this orchestra, and I want to drive home the import of the Chamber of Music of America grant, because I think for those who know, then eyebrows are raised when you hear that you got this because it is such a prestigious grant. Can you talk about some of the parameters of that grant?
Yeah, so Chamber Music America is an incredible organization. They have incredible leadership, and it's kind of filled with the members of that organization are some of the best chamber musicians across the country. And it's led by people who want to solve problems. And when you think about the idea of think tank, you have people who are at the top of each part of chamber music, which most people don't associate jazz with chamber music, but it is part of it. It's a small ensemble, right? And so really the definition of chamber music is smaller than 10.
Yeah.
That's how they assign it. And so, of course we think of string quartets, and of course we think of woodwind quintets and things like that, but jazz is also a chamber music. And so many of us are also drawing from so many different influences, not only fusion on the rock side and funk side and things like that, but also drawing into those classical things that most of us all studied, because that's where the pedagogy of the music comes from, right? And so Chamber Music America, they have several grant opportunities that are regular, and they are funded by the Doris Duke Foundation. And so that's a big deal because the Doris Duke Foundation is able to put quite a bit of funding in to basically do things like new works. They do composition, new works, granting every year on the classical side. New Works Jazz grants, that's a really big one that they've been doing for years, where people can really try innovative ideas. Now, those ones are mostly coming out of musicians that are in the New York area, and some of them are specific to that. But the one that I got is called Performance Plus. And basically, they are trying to work to help to solve the problem of the gender gap, which is beautiful, because so many people talk about the gender gap in music as well as in jazz, and how basically there are far less female than male presenting musicians, right? And everybody talks about it and everybody wants to talk about why. But Chamber Music America said, what if we help female band leaders to be able to have professional development and present their projects? And if you go onto the Chamber Music America site and look at some of the women who have received that, and it's not only women, it's women and gender minorities. So there's a lot of room there for equity. And so if you look at some of the women who have gotten that, there's some really big names on there and some really incredible people, like thinking in the last few years, Caroline Davis and Lakeisha Benjamin, who are people who are now out touring and doing really big things. Yeah. And so basically, and I also love the fact that it's professional development, because it's not just a matter of, here, go record your project. It's here, get in touch with an artist educator who you want to work with. And then let's pay you and all your musicians to have 6 rehearsals and get your project bolstered up in whatever way you want to. And it's different for everyone. It could be a brand new project like ours that didn't exist before that. Or it could be somebody who's been working for years and they really want to get more into their Brazilian grooves. And so they go work with somebody on that. There's a lot of different ways that people have done this. And so they hook you up with, and you choose your mentor basically. And then they pay the mentor very well. They pay all the musicians to do the rehearsals, because so many times when you put together a project, everybody wants the gig, the performance, but nobody wants to rehearse, even though we all know that the music will be better to present if we put in that time. But professional musicians, so many times they'll say, well, I can make the gig, I can get one rehearsal, but that's it.
Yeah. And because they're expected to give so much for free,
yes.
and all of this prelude to the finished product, it takes so much effort, and they should be compensated for that effort in an ideal world. I mean, not even in an ideal world, in just the world we inhabit should compensate them for the work that they're putting in order to put on this performance. A little soapboxing on my behalf.
But. And as musicians, we're so used to just going, oh, okay, well, I'm the band leader, so I have to take the hit. I'm going to pay everybody else, and I'm going to come away with no money, or I'm going to put in my own money into the project in order to make it happen. But in this case, the grant is written so that they get paid for the rehearsals. So it's times that many members, and then plus the actual cost of recording. And so all in all, are we able to talk numbers?
Yeah, by all means.
So all in all, this is a $20,000 grant, which really blows me away to think that here's, and this is where, it's hard not to get emotional. But when you make that realization that somebody believed in you enough to let you develop, and they're going to let you develop and present your art, and that's, I mean, who does that, right? Yeah. So when I think of, the gratitude and the humbling of going through this process, and I think it's also interesting when this could be controversial, but when we think about gender and we think about, accepting the roles and all of those things that are associated with the gender gap and all of those things, and you think, well, you just have to be a part of the world. You have to do this. You have to do all these things. You have to give up certain things, and to be able to say, here's something where I do think that women many times are willing, because of the way the world is, we are willing to say, I'm not already the authority, because I think when I've explained this grant to people at first, when I first got it, the first thing on their face is, why would you need to rehearse and be taught? you're this many years old. Don't you already have a master's degree? Don't you already, and I think that that's such an interesting thing to think about because, we already know as women that we are, second or 50th place. And so it's like, yeah, of course I want help. and to take my ideas and figure out how to express them properly and to develop them instead of just being an authority, so to speak. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And there's so much to unpack there because, so let me take the gender thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this gender disparity is real. And, when folks in jazz, folks will point to the exceptions to the rule and they'll say, oh, look at Maria Schneider, look at Alice Coltrane. And you say, yeah. And then beyond that, where are we? And it's the same thing in classical music. For years and years, folks pointed to Marin Alsop and said, oh, look, there's a female conductor. And say, yeah, but, what about all the male conductors? And shouldn't we be doing more to encourage a little more diversity of perspective, which is what that encourages, and ensure a certain amount of opportunity and access to opportunity across the spectrum. And on the subject of being taught, I find it strange that anyone would take that attitude simply because, as experienced as you are, you still have so much to learn. I mean, as much as we know, or as talented as we are in any one particular area, that's not to say that we don't have capacity for growth.
Right.
So I take issue with that mindset, but then again, I can kind of understand when somebody says, "Well, you're a master of your craft. Why would you need to learn anymore?"
Yeah, and what they don't think about is that a master's degree, getting to there is just like, it's still kind of entry level in the whole professional world. There's so much to develop and learn and to see and do, and so for anybody to say that, a master's degree is any kind of terminal degree, it's just not. I mean, most people go all the way through their doctorate on one single specialty. And, I'm a person who's always been interested in hundreds of things at a time. And so, I really do consider myself very much in the learning stage. And I think I always will. I think that the moment that I say that this is it and it must be so and it's just this way, I mean, certainly there's certain things that I feel strongly about, but if I ever stop caring to learn and grow, I think that would be the end.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way. Like, once I feel like I have no more to learn, then what's the point in continuing?
Yeah.
So yeah. So you have recorded 3 tracks so far, and are they going to be the final tracks that are ultimately destined for the album, or are you going to re-record them as part of this recording session at WSU that takes place after the Hamilton studio concert?
Yeah, we'll actually re-record the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
So while I feel pretty good about that original 3 tracks that we did, I think we can make them even better. And that recording actually, because that was the demo that we made to apply for Chamber Music America, which only required that you had at least half of the ensemble. So that one didn't have strings. So it had the full horn section, but no strings. Now we did record or perform one other time since then. So we'd had the first unveiling in the fall, and then we participated at the WSU FOCOM, which I think is called Festival for Arts Contemporary Music, I think is what that stands for. And so we did a couple of more tracks there that we performed live. So the performance that we do at Hamilton Listening Room, which is August 10th, that will be the first time that the whole entire project is presented.
Oh, that's great. And the video recording that's going to be part of that, is that part of the grant too, or is that just in order to showcase the ensemble, because that's what Don Hamilton does very well?
Yeah, I want to do all of those things, but that actually is part of the Artist Trust grant that we also got.
Which is the second grant, right?
Yeah. So with Glass Bead Orchestra, I have 2 grants from 2024 for that, Chamber Music America to do the recording, the development, and then also Artist Trust grant for Artist Project.
And then there's a third grant a Spokane Arts Grant Award grant, a Saga
Yes.
grant in all of this. But that is not for this project. That is for Imagine Jazz and a lot of the community building and continuing education that you do.
Exactly. Yeah. So Imagine Jazz is my nonprofit, which I started in 2019 or 2018 actually. So we have at this point, that's our third Saga grant, which is incredible. It makes it possible to do the work that we do because we can't achieve amazing things without funding. People pay for their tickets and they think, oh, well, this is a lot of money. But generally the ticket sales for the events that we do with the guest artists that we bring in, it's about 50 to 60% of the cost. So without grant funding, we're not really able to operate. So we have, this is our third Saga Award. And this year I decided to focus it on two parts of it. Part of it we already did in April for Jazz Appreciation Month, and we used it to pay for the educational sponsorship for Jahari Stampley and Michael Mayo workshops so that the local community and students could learn from those folks. And then the rest of it is designated towards community building. Mm-hmm. And so what that stems from is one of our missions within Imagine Jazz. We have the first part, which is to celebrate jazz heritage. And, we're doing that through bringing guest artists, showcasing various music, showcasing local artists. But the other part that we wrote into our mission pretty early was that we would foster a sense of community. Mm-hmm. And those are great words, and we are now in our 7th year of operation, and we've tried a lot of different things. At first, we just thought that meant jam sessions and fellowship events. So let's do get-togethers, let's bolster the community in different ways, and we've done those things, and those have been successful at the rate that they are. But it's not as impactful as I would like it to be. And so what we tried this year is associated with our big festival in April this year. We did a community building day where we had a jam session. We actually featured a whole bunch of our students. So we had students from Spokane, All City Jazz Ensembles. We had a whole bunch of local college students participate in a jam session where we went over to Music City and we played for the whole day and afternoon. And then every person who participated, I gave them a ticket to the Jahari Stampley show so that they could actually engage with the show as well. Yeah. Because what we find is while I thought that the community, the jazz community at large, would be really excited to participate in the guest artist concerts, I found that it's more the general public and certain jazz community members, and it's not necessarily the musicians. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Number one, sometimes they're always gigging. Yeah. Also, there's the financial piece, is that people are, they put their whole life into learning and playing music, and maybe they don't have the amount of money for a ticket if it's a higher price thing. Maybe there's some skepticism about, do I really want to go pay $30 and sit and watch someone when I could be making my own music? There's a lot of pieces to that. But the point being that I believe at this point that the best way to upbuild the community is to showcase more local musicians. And so that's what the other half of that Saga grant will do, is that over the course of this next year, we will be featuring more musicians. And that kind of came out of we did a big festival last year as part of the expo. And I was able to feature, I think it was 8 professional bands and then 2 student groups. So 10 bands performed that day. And that was just such a beautiful celebration of all of these musicians and local community members out together and performing. And so, basically what I learned from that is that the best way to engage more of our local community members, musicians, is to let them perform, let them actually participate in their craft. And so in doing so, I hope that will holistically become more a community of engagement where people are more interested in learning from the guest artists and those sorts of things. But that's kind of where that lands is, we want to feature our local musicians too. We don't just want to be bringing in guest artists. Now that guest artist thing is really important because it inspires the local community. And so for me, rather than having to drive to Seattle or fly to New York or fly to San Francisco, we can bring in musicians and then learn from them and get to spend the day or the weekend with them. And so to me, that's incredible. I want as much time as possible to learn from these folks. And that's kind of where that stems from too, is that I hoped and believed that other musicians would want to be a part of that as well. And they do. It's never as big of a splash as you hoped.
And on the subject of attendance, though, and I think maybe we get into a problem that might be associated with Spokane as being a mid-sized city, is that there's a certain amount of burnout. As much as I support the arts and I want to be there and make sure that I'm showing up for a lot of these events, I just can't make everything. I don't have the disposable income, number one, and then also I just don't have the time or the capacity to be able to do that. And with the jazz community, and this is a subject that I'd like to touch on, if only briefly, but I'd still like to touch on it nevertheless. With the jazz community, you have a certain built-in pool. And it could be just basic burnout where the usual suspects are expected to show up at every single gig. And the solution to that is not to say, we need these same folks to keep turning out, but expand the audience, which is what you're doing with Imagine Jazz, is cultivating that appreciation and growing the audience so that, somebody can take a concert off and they won't necessarily be missed because
Right.
there will be somebody else who appreciates jazz to take their place.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because you never really know when you start down a path where it's going to end up. Mm-hmm. And I thought when I first started the organization, I named it after our band. Our band at the time was called the Imagine Collective. And so the very first festival that we did, I said, let's call it the Imagine Jazz Festival. And that was in 2018. We had Willie Jones III. It was an incredible thing downtown when the House of Soul was still, was it the House of Soul? And it was incredible. And I really thought at that time that the people around me in the band were going to be the ones by my side doing this work and benefiting from it because of the fact that we're bringing in these musicians that we could learn from and presenting them, and that might sound a little bit, it might sound a certain way, like we're trying to get something. That's not what I mean at all by that, but just because we are the ones that care about the music and about that curation, that we can bring these specific people into our community because everybody has their own focuses, right? Mm-hmm. But long story short is it turned out that was not at all the collection of people by my side that was going to continue. And that it actually had nothing to do with that particular band at all, and that it turned into something completely different. and that is really a beautiful thing, even though there's a little bit of maybe disappointment in that initial, like, this is what's going to happen. Oh, okay, that's not how it's going to go.
Oh, yeah.
But the way that we've landed, sometimes the people that I look around to in the audience, it's incredible when I think about the list of people that we've presented and the people who've been in the room at various times. It's pretty incredible.
Well, I think the first time we met, I couldn't believe it because I was still in shock over Jeremy Pelt.
Yes.
I was like, you brought in Jeremy Pelt. Yeah. You're the one who brought Jeremy Pelt here. And so, yeah, it was, the number of folks that you have brought in, and then Jahari Stampley, I mean, he went on to win, I'm struggling to remember the exact award, but he went on to win an incredible award.
Yeah, it's now called the International Herbie Hancock Award.
That's right, yeah.
Which used to be called the Thelonious Monk Award, but they changed it because of copyright. But it was for years, Thelonious Monk was the highest of the high jazz awards, because it's basically a competition for the best person on that instrument under 35. And so eventually there was some copywriting with the estate, and so they turned it into the Herbie Hancock. But that's a really wonderful thing because the Herbie Hancock Institute is incredible, and they really enveloped a lot of beautiful things.
But you booked Jahari before his fee skyrocketed and he won that award. But you had recognized that talent and solicited him as a musician and brought him to town. Now, I think that raises the question, what is the jazz scene like, both in terms of performers and audience in Spokane? Are you encouraged by what's going on? Is there enough cultivation of an appreciation for jazz among Spokanites? And also, I'm aware that we have a huge influx of people moving into the area. Are jazz lovers moving into the area and coming out and saying, hey, we want jazz concerts to sate this need?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really very much depends on the venue and what it is you're working with, because it's a smaller population. You're not going to get the numbers that you're going to get in the larger, but they're out there and they're here. And, one of the pieces of that is that you're dealing with a genre that is marginalized in a way. We don't think of it that way because, it's such, it holds such historic importance, and most of us recognize that. But, a lot of there's between racial stereotypes and commercialism. There's a lot of places where jazz really slips through the cracks and has never been a popular music since the early 20s, and so you can't expect those numbers, right?
Would you not say that during the 50s and 60s, it also experienced a sufficient resurgence to make it popular once again? So we have the jazz age, and again, we can start debating about the various strains of jazz and what constitutes jazz. But I just think, we have the jazz age in the 20s when it was a popular music. But I also think of the 50s and 60s as definitely a jazz golden age where most folks could be expected, if you walked in and sifted through their LP collection, you would find some jazz albums there.
For sure. And what's interesting about that era is that that's kind of the point where jazz music started to have an academic understanding to it, where people would say, oh, well, I am cultured if I also understand or feel this. And so that can really be double-edged sword because, there's things about that are also difficult. But from my standpoint, anytime we can get people to engage with music that could be considered difficult and open the horizons or open their eyes into the music that maybe they hadn't known before, that's a success. And so I think one of the biggest difficulties that we deal with the word jazz is that it's so steeped in so many different types of difficulties, we'll call it, challenges, because of the onset of the music in America, which had a certain racial context to it. So, you really cannot ignore that aspect of it, is that certain musicians were not allowed to do and be in certain ways. And the history of our country is so difficult, and this music is right entangled in it. And so because of that, you kind of have to peel it apart and take a look at all the aspects separately and say, okay, well, we're not doing this anymore. And there's so many difficult eras and things about it. But there are certain musicians who felt that jazz, the label, was a negative context, and many musicians, Duke Ellington and various people who didn't want to be defined by the genre label. And I feel like most musicians are like that. When we're writing music, we're oftentimes not, unless you're trying to write a hit, you're not trying to stay within some box. You're just trying to create whatever the art is at the time. And the genres are something that's a convenient convenience for the record labels and people who are selling and promoting and purchasing, right? That's very, very, very helpful. But so much of the music just is and was never going to be able to be widely popular at a massive level, the way things like Taylor Swift and other things that are massively sold, right? And so you have to look at it with that lens of it is a marginalized music. It is not it's, I don't even know the numbers at this point. Is it like 10% of record sales or something? It might even be 2%. Yeah. It's a small amount. But that's not discouraging, because there are so many people who live their lives like me, just passionately for the music. And these people are all over the world and they can be found in a lot of places. So to answer your question about the local scene, I am often encouraged when we play in places that are very public, like the park or the mall, when we set those up. And we will have people come through and go, "Oh, you're here. We didn't know this existed."
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, not only because of the demographic in our area, but also because of their assumption of what jazz is to them and the way that they have associated with it. They assume that our local jazz is either not good jazz or is a very particular type of jazz. And so I do find oftentimes, because of the vein that we participate in and the people that we bring in, that people are often pleasantly surprised as like, "Oh, this does exist here, and we would like to attend."
Yeah, and there's that accessibility, and I know that's maybe a fraught word, but there's that accessibility certainly to the music that you have done as a band leader, but that you're also doing with the Glass Bead Orchestra, because Lonely Muse, for example, is vocals. It's very much in I would say a conventional straight ahead vein, and speaking to your point about people just coming across you and saying, "Oh, you're here," in that process of discovery. And I think what's more important is exposure, and why you and Imagine Jazz have to keep plugging away at this, because it is that exposure that then leads people who are open-minded enough to challenge their assumptions. Because for the longest time, when I wasn't exposed to jazz, I assumed that it was folks dressed in black, in berets, doing spoken word poetry, or it was Coltrane at his most ethereal. And neither of those seemed like areas in which I fit. And it wasn't until I was exposed to things like, I think I've shared with you, somebody put on Clifford Brown and Max Roach, and the light went on. And I thought, this is it was Delilah, and it just spoke to me. And I thought, I've made that connection. And it just took that exposure. It took somebody putting that record on or CD and saying, "Listen to this." Yeah. And so I think that exposure is so important. Because then, once I was hooked, then I started going down, all the various paths and just uncovering these such rich veins. Yeah. I come back to this issue of exposure, but man, it can be an uphill battle, and it can be a little thankless sometimes when you just think, man, are we reaching anybody? Are we reaching anybody?
Right. And every grant that I write, there's always that question that says, how will you know if you're successful? And the first time I answered that one, I really thought about it, and it's like, you might be like, "Oh, well, did we sell this many tickets? Did we make our money back? Did we make a profit?" But those are not actually how we gauge it. It's, did we reach some people? Did we reach somebody? Did we find someone who, there will be people who will drive from Montana or Twisp or something like that, the Tri-Cities, and come in for a show, and they're just delighted. Last year we took some risks, and we really because it's very important to me to push the boundaries and present not just straight ahead music, even though I would love to just have a curated series of that so that people could know what to expect. It's very important to me to feature people who are innovative and pushing the boundaries, and that can be challenging sometimes. And so last spring, we brought in not one, but two alto trios. And it just happened to be they were both coming through in March. We had Tim Byrne, who's an incredible musician out of Brooklyn, and then Caroline Davis. And she does some absolutely beautiful work that's, she would describe it as social justice. So, she's reaching into various things that are just important, right? And so, to have two of those and a very small audience in the room, maybe 35, 40 people, but everybody in the room just being moved and affected in a very positive way. Some people listening to Tim Byrne who'd never heard free music like that in their lives, and to go through the experience of like, I have no idea what's going on. And, the butterflies in the stomach that come with that sort of thing. But see, for me as a musician, a trained musician who's, followed a lot of this music for a long time, to me, that's excitement. Some people feel butterflies and they go, oh, that's scary. But to me, that's exciting, and we're going to do something new that we haven't done before. And to me, that's exciting.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that this concert on August 10th at the Hamilton studio really get some folks out, whether they come because they think, oh, this person won some grants and that's caused me to sit up and take some notice, or they're just curious, or they know that the listening room generally puts on some really top-notch entertainment, and they just come out and they have that feeling of butterflies and they can kind of relish it.
Sure.
So you'll have done your job then.
And it's an incredible band. We have Jared Hall on trumpet, who's one of the main soloists. He's the director of jazz at Whitworth. I have some really incredible friends, and they're part of this. So my friend Cameron LaPlante, who I have known longer than I have not known him. I've known him for 28 years.
Yeah, and taught both of my daughters over at Odyssey.
Right.
Yeah.
Incredible saxophonist, woodwind artist. He's one of the other solos. We're flying in Daniel Panilla back from Michigan because he was part of the project before he got a job at University of Michigan, and so he's going to come over. Kate and Josh Skinner from U of I. It's kind of a super group of regional artists. So I hope people will really, really enjoy it.
So we're going to stop and put a cap on the music discussion, and then we're going to move into what caps every episode of this, which is the lightning round.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're prepared for it.
Okay.
I'm hoping you relish a little bit of a challenge, but I'm not going to put you on the spot for any of your knowledge. These are going to be kind of improvisational questions.
Okay.
So they should be, fit the bill.
Great.
So the first one is an either or.
Okay.
Very simple. Comedy movies or horror movies?
Oh, comedy.
Yeah, are you not a horror fan at all?
I don't like the horror thing, and I think part of it is the not wanting to see the blood and gore, but it's just I have the habit of I can be very affected by things. So the visual of those things, they can haunt me in my dreams and whatnot. and it just puts me in a certain place of thinking that I generally don't like to be in. So I would put myself in an anti-horror.
Yeah, and if you have a tendency to empathize as well, then you're going to go with the victim and be, doubly traumatized.
Yes.
Is there a particular subgenre of comedy movies that you're into? Like, are you into the kind of twee 1980s nerd jock comedies? Or
those are fun. Yeah, I like the 80s stuff. I'm kind of an 80s kid, and some of the 90s stuff, some of that got a little bit drug culture, so I don't necessarily associate with that anymore. But I don't know. My new guilty pleasure is I started following that guy Josh Johnson comedy, and so it's not a movie, but he puts out a new comedy series every week, And so that's kind of my new thing. I'm like, ooh, it's Thursday. Let me watch because he's lighthearted and it's funny, but it's not, it touches on some political stuff, but it's not like, heavy.
So you prefer to laugh rather than watch through splayed fingers,
Yes.
which is
yes.
perfectly healthy. So now we'll touch on jazz a little bit. I'd like to know a historic concert that you would have loved to have attended. Maybe that's Rollins at the Village Vanguard, maybe that's Brubeck at Oberlin, or if you're like, nah, I can't really think of a concert offhand, a recording session that you would have loved to have been a part of, like Mingus Aum,
So that's where I need a TARDIS and to be able to travel from thing to thing, because to choose one.
But do you have a dream concert or a dream session that you just think, I would have loved to have been in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey at this point in time?
I would have loved to have been in Englewood Cliffs at all for always, that whole, there's just magic. There's so much.
And I should note that we're referring to the Rudy Van Gelder studios in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey.
Yeah, to have been, a light switch in that studio and to have been able to watch that. I don't know. I think, anything from Coltrane would have been amazing. Anything from Jackie McLean, Bobby Hutcherson. That's a really, really big one for me. So right away, the first thing I actually thought of is that Hollywood Bowl concert from Bobby Hutcherson's Now. That's the last half of that Pink album. Half of that was recorded live at the Hollywood Bowl, and when you listen to, I don't know how long the applause is, but it's really substantial. So that's one that comes to mind that would be really, really special. But something where, to have heard Bird, to have heard Charlie Parker with, one of those live sessions with Dizzy, or...
and preferably, one of the sessions where he was a little more with it.
Right.
Although he managed to turn out some phenomenal work, even when he was a little under the weather.
Although, one of my favorite Charlie Parker recordings is that Lover Man, where he was so excruciatingly, down that that comes through in the music. From the first time I heard that when I was in 7th grade, I was like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. But Mingus, that would have been a big one too. Something with Eric Dolphy.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of things I wish I could have seen.
Well, maybe you'll come across the TARDIS and then you can just flit from recording session to recording session.
Great. Yeah. Oh, and then Attica Blues, the Archie Shepp.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been with the big band. That would have been a good one too.
So we have established we've established that you're good at a lot of things. You can sing. You're multi-instrumentalist. I want to know one thing that you are terrible at.
Keeping my house in order.
Okay. So is this something, I mean, your priorities are elsewhere. Is that something that you would change if you could, like you'd like to get better at it? Or have you just kind of resigned yourself to, this is the way things are, and I resign myself to being terrible at keeping tidy?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it's the latter. Every day I think, oh, if I could just do this, but my spirit is called in so many different places at any given time, and I really do. People say they're busy, but sometimes when I think of how many things I do stack in a day, because I do generally just, I run my dogs and I do that kind of stuff, and then I just go off to teach for the day, and I go from appointment to appointment to appointment,
including podcast interviews.
Yeah. Which this is a fun one. This is a great addition to to the day. But oftentimes what happens is it's like stacks of season, and I think a lot of artists will understand this. And so many people would just die if they really saw the inside of my house. So thankfully most people don't. But what happens is, you get so hyper focused on, this is the concert or whatever the thing is, the semester that I'm teaching adjunct or whatever it is. And then I just know that there is a season that, okay, well, in winter break, I'm going to clean and move these things and put them away. And unfortunately, my husband is driven crazy by this because he really would do much better if things were really organized. And I've really thought a lot about this lately, is that the only way that that's going to happen is for me to do less things. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not ready to do less things right now at this point. And so it is a thing that I hope to get better at. But it's also, I think I've resolved that this is just kind of how it is.
Again, it's priorities. Things have to be ordered above other things, and something's got to give. So, I quite honestly, I personally would rather have jazz than have your house tidy. But then again, I don't live there. So,
yeah, exactly. If you had to live there, you might feel differently. But other than that, if you just ignore this part and focus over here, you're fine.
And then finally, what is your spirit animal?
Okay, so I feel like it would probably be a bird. I really, really love crows and corvids. Every time I see them, I love those. But I feel like if I got to choose, I would want it to be a wading bird so that I could be around the water.
Oh. So two things to tease out there. Why crows and corvids? Is it just their uncanny intelligence or what?
I love them so much. Every time I see them, they make me happy. And it's just a thing that I can't really explain. They're just lovely. And it's funny too, because a lot of people don't like those noises that they make, but I just love it. Every time I hear one caw, and it's like they seem spirited, it's like they're doing something, there's always something happening. And if there's an entire murder of them, it's like, there's some activity happening.
Well, just the fact that a group of them takes on the name murder, right, and that's the established designation, it always leads me to believe that they're up to something. Yeah. And so, I don't share the same affinity for crows and corvids.
And the magpies too, because everyone I know, they're like, oh, it's a terrible noise. I love it. It's almost comforting. I think it's an incredible noise.
Well, you'll need to channel that with the saxophone. A whole album of crow sounds. I can see it now. But the waterborne birds, do you have an affinity for water? And if so, what are you doing in a landlocked city like Spokane?
I do find it very comforting, just being around water. When I was a kid, so I grew up, I always say that I grew up in the rural Northwest surrounding Spokane, because I was born in the Reardon area, born in Davenport, but I started my life in the Reardon. And then early on, we moved out to the Wellpinit Reservation, so I spent several years out there. And when I was there, we oftentimes lived in very remote area where, for instance, you would have to walk a very long time up the driveway, which in the spring would be washed out, so you couldn't drive, for instance, up it. So, but the point of that is that up in this beautiful meadow, there was a creek and some trees, and it was like I was surrounded by nature. So raccoons and all these lovely animals, and I just would build worlds. I would be out playing and in my own world, and my soundtrack, my life story at that time was going to be surrounded by all these animal friends, and I really did have them. And we had animals. We had I had a pony when I was a kid.
Oh wow, every young girl's dream.
Right, and I didn't even ask for it. My stepdad was just like, here, have a pony. And it's funny when I think back about that. Spot, my pony. And we had pigs, we had and I always, I love animals, and I've had not one but 2 litters of animals born on or with me. This is kind of a funny thing, is that a litter of puppies born right on my bed when I was sleeping when I was a young child, and then a litter of kittens in my dresser drawer. So always been surrounded by animals, and so back to the water thing, is that just that creek is just it felt like such a calming thing. And so, here in Spokane, I probably go to the river every day, sometimes twice a day. We'll walk around there. I love the ocean. I think if I had the money, I would retire near the ocean or a lake.
A little further down the road, but yeah, who knows? You can and then reconnect with your spirit animal there. Well, Rachel, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and talking about Imagine Jazz, this August 10th concert with the Glass Bead Orchestra. It's just been great talking to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.